Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 914th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Kim Conaty, Edouard Kopp, and Christina Yang. We're thrilled to welcome poet Cleo Abramian here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but they do serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. Kim Conaty is the Stephen and Anne Ames Curator of Drawings and Prints at the Whitney Museum, a position she has held since 2017. In addition to overseeing the Whitney's collection of drawings and prints, she has organized several exhibitions there, including Edward Hopper's New York and Nothing is So Humble, Prints from Everyday Objects. Conaty holds a Ph.D. in the history of art from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Edouard Kopp is the John R. Eckel Jr. Chief Curator of the Menil Drawing Institute, a program of the Menil Collection in Houston that seeks to foster scholarship and raise public understanding of the drawing medium through its collection, exhibitions, publications, public programs, and fellowships. He is the author of Robert Motherwell Drawing, As Fast as the Mind Itself, and co-editor of Dare to Know, Prints and Drawings in the Age of Enlightenment. Kopp holds a Ph.D. in the history of art from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. And our host today, Christina Yang, is an independent curator, writer, and scholar, and educator based in New York. She specializes in experimental genres, politics of the image, social practice, and feminist care. She is a Ph.D. candidate in performance studies at NYU. Her dissertation, Performance and the Gaze, Spectatorship in the Kitchen Archive, 1974 to 84, is forthcoming, and we are lucky to have her as a contributor to the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I will pass it over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for that beautiful welcome and introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to further extend the warm Brooklyn Rail welcome to all of you Ruth Asawa fans out there joining us. As Chloe kindly introduced, I'm your hostess, Christina Yang, and I'm so thrilled to be here in conversation with Kim Conaty and Edouard Kopp, and I cannot wait for Cleo's closing poetry reading. So besides doing some close looking at Ruth Asawa's work today, I'm hoping we draw out some of the finely wrought decision-making that goes into exhibition building and to growing a community. Ruth Asawa, the exhibition Through Line, comes to us at a time when our world is still in a hard place, following the global pandemic, the racial violence of 2020-21 and ongoing, the intense climate patterns from this summer, all that foreground minoritarian struggle for BIPOC and non-binary lives, and at a time when labor across many industries are still organizing. Believe it or not, these macro, socioeconomic, and geopolitical conversations find resonance in the micro study of Ruth Asawa and her work. As a Japanese American citizen, as a longtime San Francisco Bay Area resident artist, a community organizer, a mother, a wife, and an educator, her intersectional histories are still being unpacked and discovered. And of course, this exhibition provides incredible insight and groundwork for that further study. Equally, she models an authentic artistic journey that belongs to no one else. And as we shall see, especially evident in her extraordinary everyday practice of drawing and the examination of a sheet of paper. So I have some prompts for the curators that are also going to be cued by Ruth Asawa works of art. And I hope that along the way that you can embrace with us a body of work that is simultaneously quiet and revelatory, solitary and relational, and intimate while teaching us about the world. We'll talk until just around 2 o'clock, and then we'll open up for your questions. but let's just start. Chloe, can we get the first image? So I have these prompts sort of like divided into like my own question themes. And this first one is just titled Why? And so I'd love to maybe ask the curators, you know, with this like rare self-portrait of Ruth, no less drawing as our visual prompt, if they could share with us how they began to advocate for this project. I'm particularly interested in, you know, why Ruth Asawa, why the focus on her drawing practice, why the Whitney and Demenil, and why now? I understand that you've both been working on the show for the last 4 years, which have been an incredible time of, you know, unexpected everything, you know, history, trauma, much less organizing a complicated body of work. So I guess I'd just like to open up and ask the two of you, what has this journey been like? And or if you would like to actually reflect on this image. I don't know if you're as tired and as energetic as she looks in the image, or where you're at, but we'd love to hear from you how this project began and about the journey.
Do you want me to start, Edouard?
Sure.
Okay, well, we're just going to pass off back and forth, I think, throughout. I have maybe 2 responses, Christina, both to this image and to your question about the project. This particular image, I always smile when I see it come up because this was and still remains this sort of the lead image in almost every presentation that I have done about the show, and even in the very, very first proposals about this show now 4 years ago here at the museum, because I think in a way it's such a special, it's such a special work, really a unique work in that we're seeing Asawa in this moment of self-portraiture, which we don't really get much of. So much of her life is about others and those around her. And of course, to see her sort of completely absorbed in the act of drawing, I think just it captures a lot of the essence of, I think, what we wanted to get at in this project. From the Whitney side, and Edouard will talk about from the Menil side, kind of how we came together, I would say that Asawa has been increasingly an important artist for us to be thinking about within our collection. We at the Whitney have had a beautiful example of one of Asawa's looped wire sculptures in our collection since the early 1960s. And we've noticed that since we've moved downtown into this building down in Gansevoort Street, we have had that work on view almost permanently since being in, whether it's in a collection show, whether it's in a thematic show. It's become this masterwork that we can't live without. It always has to be on view. And with that in mind, now, I guess 6-7 years ago, I began looking at some of her drawings and working on an acquisition of a drawing of Asawa's. And it was through that window, through getting a better sense of what was out there and what had yet to be discovered, that it was like, yeah, I think we've said this before, it was like a kid in a candy store for a drawing curator to see this incredible, expansive body of work. And I'll pass it over to Edouard.
Sure. So for us, the artist really plays a special role in the sense that when we opened the building of the Drawing Institute back in late 2018, for the first year, we had one of Asawa's loop wire sculptures in the entry space to the Drawing Institute. And so on a daily basis, I would see this work, and my colleagues did too, and seeing these incredible linear drawings in space that have a dynamic quality, but also extraordinary cast shadows, which are another dimension of drawing, really planted a seed. And then years ago, and now it's almost like mythical time for Kim and I, we can't quite remember, but we realized that we had a common passion for the artist, and realized that certainly many of works on paper were incredible, but slightly lesser known than the sculptures. And that's how when we embarked on this project. And I have to say, we really started with an open mind. It became clear early on that it couldn't just be a works on paper show, because, as many of you will know, she thought of sculpture as a kind of natural extension of her drawing practice. So from the very early on, we realized that we needed to include folded papers, reliefs, looped wire, tied wire sculptures, and even we have an example of a cast sculpture by Asawa. And in terms of having someone like Asawa at the Menil, it resonated from the get-go. As you may know, our founders, Jim and Dominique de Menil, believed in the importance of art as a way to enrich everyone's life. And I think ethically and philosophically, they shared a lot with Asawa, even though I have nothing to prove that they ever met. I don't think they ever met. But certainly, on a philosophical level, it felt like a great fit. And then also at the Drawing Institute, bringing Asawa made so much sense, because one of the things we're trying to do is to really think about what drawing has been, what it can be, in expansive ways. And really, Asawa's art is extraordinary in exploration of that space between 2-dimension and 3-dimension.
You both so much for those reflections. I'm especially taken that you mentioned your encounter with her sculptures that were on view, and really taking the audience perspective of seeing her work, as Kim mentioned, continuously, and Edouard, as you mentioned, in the lobby of the de Menil. As we're going to, I think, progress through the images, one of the things that I'm interested in certainly is the resonance of Asawa's work to the public today, again, coming through the last 4 years, as you have lived through as well. So I really appreciate you saying that. And just for the audience's sake, we are going to be looking at some of these really incredible experimental, I'm going to call them experimental works that are between, what you think of traditionally as drawing, as works on paper, but actually have these incredible references and allusions and a kind of practice that looks sculptural on paper. And so her really thinking about the medium and her practice changed the way I think about sculpture, more so than drawing, just because it's so expansive. But I also want to credit the curators for your open-mindedness in really following the artist's lead and letting her kind of show us what drawing can be. So this beautiful installation view here opens up the second thematic area I'd love to sort of frame for the two of you to speak about, and I am actually calling it Ghosts and Angels. And the reason why I do that is because, as we're going to look more closely at some of Asawa's particular works, as distilled and rigorous and almost meditative as her work is, I always feel the sort of haunting. There's a hauntingness to the practice, the steadiness. We'll start with this image and hold it here for maybe just a second. But the previous image showed a gathering of works that you've culled from her college years, her study at Black Mountain College. And my question sort of traverses both that first wall and then working clockwise actually into the galleries, the section that you call Found and Transformed. And just for the audience's sake, I'll refer to the exhibition, and all the images are drawn from works that are on view at the Whitney right now through January. But certainly the research in the catalog and then the research at Asawa, extends beyond that. But I really did want to focus on the exhibition on view, since and encourage all of you to go if you can, and if you can't, take advantage of the other resources that Whitney has put online. So this section, which will look at 3 works from her Black Mountain College years, I'd love to have you talk about how she arrived at Black Mountain College, and what kind of training or background she might have brought with her, and then what she discovered, and then of course any of your personal reflections on the 3 works that we're going to look at. Edouard, do you want to start with this one, or?
Sure. I mean, I could say she first, she grew up in she had Japanese parents, and would go once a week, to learn Japanese, and also was instructed in the art of calligraphy. So that's an early part of her training. Then, as is well known. She and her family were interned in a camp during World War II because they were of Japanese origin. And in this camp, she actually met some Disney animators. So she talks about that period as being the first time that she could really focus on drawing, and she gets instruction, even though informal, from real professionals. Then she went briefly to an art school, and then heard about this really groundbreaking college called Black Mountain College in North Carolina, and that was an extremely formative period. And the exhibition, which we structured in a thematic way, does not have a kind of Black Mountain College section per se. The works are actually in different sections, but we call the first section, and the slide before showed you the entry into the exhibition, and this section is called Learning to See. And as she would often say, the main teacher that she had there was Joseph Albers. So she was an American artist with Japanese origins who received the best of European Bauhaus education. And as Albers often used to say, I'm not going to teach you really so much about drawing. I want you to learn to see. And so this is kind of key ethical point of her context when she makes drawings like these ones. Also, this particular example, which is quite wonderful, so studies of her own hands and feet, is especially very interesting because you have these, body parts coming together, but also speaks, I think, about the sense of economy that she was instilled at Black Mountain, making the most with what you have. And obviously, this was not a rich college by any means, but for them, it was just not only overcoming the paucity of material, but it was really a kind of it was an ethical value. How can you maximize the materials that you have?
Thank you so much, Edouard. Kim, would it be okay if we go to the next image, and maybe you could speak a little bit about this first section, this Learning to See section, and your thoughts on Ruth arriving here and her angel that she met?
Sure. Yeah, so we love this image so much. This is also a work coming out of Black Mountain College, and we were I think captivated by thinking about someone like Asawa at a place like Black Mountain College, in the sort of expansiveness of the learning environment, and just even the communal environment, just kind of everyone working together, living together. And these works that have this kind of dancers in the subtitle are themselves inspired by the art by Asawa, watching and thinking about dancers, often from, we think of Merce Cunningham's dance classes there. So there's, I think, even captured in this one work, you have also the sense of the interdisciplinarity in a place like Black Mountain that was so critical for Asawa's work. Even the color, you think about, Albers and the various color studies that he had his students doing at the time, and that these types of forms, these sometimes nested forms, these curvilinear forms that we also see Asawa drawing and sketching in her biology notebooks from Black Mountain College. It's always a good reminder that it was not an art school, but a liberal arts school, so that she was also taking math and science and really thinking in all of those terms. One other thing that I was going to add about Asawa's path to Black Mountain is that, Edouard mentioned that she had gone to another school first before Black Mountain, and that was Milwaukee Teachers College. And I think what's important there is that at that moment in her life, that teaching was the first profession that she was really, I think she always wanted to be an artist and have that, that was just part of her life, but that the idea of teaching being so important from the beginning. And you imagine someone like that really being so receptive to pedagogy, to like even the ideas of pedagogy that were so much part of Black Mountain in the teaching of Albers, etc. So that's, I think, maybe, should I stop there and keep going? We can just keep
Sure.
talking, so just
I
cut us.
know, we could. I mean, I might just mention that I thought I also remember reading that it was in her like formal education and thinking about being a teacher that she was actually told that she might not get a job as a teacher, and that
Exactly.
it actually related to her ethnicity. So
Exactly.
yeah, so in a kind of odd twist of fate and history, she was turned away from something she wanted to pursue that was social and public, but then actually turned to become an artist. And so, I mean, I just think that's such an interesting, yeah, kind of like collusion of different cultures.
No, absolutely. And I think that's something, and that also I think relates to her time in the incarceration camps. It's these moments that are for her as a Japanese American at that time of all of these isolation policies, and then yeah, a real sort of skepticism about whether or not someone like that would be hired to finish her crediting for Teachers College. And the fact that within those situations that she had these ultimately, she was able to maybe she was open. It's like you don't want to say that like, oh, and it was all fine in the end, but that her persistence, her sort of belief in art, in art making, in community, allowed her to have these ultimately sort of positive experiences in otherwise really unfortunate negative situations. And she does talk about like drawing being a salvation during that time.
Right. Also, just maybe one more note that I was struck, this is something I learned from the exhibition in, reading your wonderful extended labels and listening to some of the audio stops, was that in this very early drawing, when she's studying the dancers, it was pointed to by your text with that, thinking about the figure in these kind of orb-like forms, and then, walking around the corner and seeing the Whitney's beautiful six-lobe piece really just made me, I'd never thought about that way. And here I am, a performance, scholar. But so that, to see that, to read that wall, learning to see and see how carefully you selected the works and how it, like every single work relates to another thread later in her work. So I really, congratulate you on that visual storytelling. Chloe, why don't we go to the last work in this section of Black Mountain College? So, either one of you, if you'd love to tell us what this work is, but I am really touched by this piece because of, Edouard, as you mentioned, the economy of it. There are other works where Ruth, engages in a kind of printmaking practice from very, very humble materials, but there's just something about the story behind this work that I think is so moving. And so would love to hear either one of you speak to that.
Sure, I'm happy. So in 1948-49, she works at the laundry room at Black Mountain. And as part of a course by Albers, she's asked to essentially use everyday materials as implements. And she realizes that by borrowing a stamp from the laundry room that says BMC, standing for Black Mountain, that would be used to actually mark the sheets, she could use it to make these stamped works, which are really incredible. And here is a wonderful composition of really radial in nature. It's like a sun with beams, coming out, and a sense of movement. And so what Asawa does in his works is really repurpose an implement that is not a drawing implement usually, and makes it her own. And he varies the sometimes the intensity of the blacks, but also the density with which he applies the stamps. And there are some examples like this one on blank sheets of paper, others are on newspapers. And they're really wonderfully inventive. The idea of stamping is actually one that she would keep engaging with. Then in the 50s, when she settles in San Francisco, using bike pedals, potatoes, apples, and other sort of kitchen staples or everyday objects, really turning everyday things that no one cares about or no one really sees or no one really sees for what they can be, and then turning them into these implements that challenge her, but also help her create these very poetic works. So for her, I think challenging yourself, expanding the range of our mark making is something that she welcomes, and the idea of being challenged materially, finding what you can around you, is really in keeping with what she had done at Black Mountain, but also even before that, in a family where truck farmers, they were not wealthy. She and her siblings had to be very inventive, and so really by the time she comes to Black Mountain, she's got, in a way, many values that align so naturally with what she's then taught by Albers, Mr. Fuller, Max Den, and other professors there. So.
Thank you so much, Edouard. Kim, do you want to add anything, or we could go on to the next work?
I'll let you keep going.
Okay, I also just want to say that I'm, again, as just to reinforce what you just said, Edouard, just again touched at the image of her in the laundry room, doing this domestic chore and then coming out of it with like this amazing like sunburst. I mean, that to me is just says so much about, as you said, about her values and about how she took, took these ordinary actually act of labor and care for her community and turned it into this, beautiful, like poetic, unexpected work. So I mean, this is a piece I feel like, has so much in it to yet to be really unpacked. Okay, Chloe, if we go to the next section. So I think we're still in Black Mountain College here with this piece, and so I thought it'd be an interesting transition to a section that I actually, just call Meander, because that is such a Ruth Asawa, like deeply rich, category of work. And Kim, your essay in the exhibition catalog, the title is, again, it's such a beautiful title. Your hand is already flowing. Even though this is a cutout piece, I thought we could talk a little bit about how the meander played in her career, long practice, starting with this piece. There's another piece about 15 years later, 16, when she's already a mother, moved to San Francisco, and she might actually, I think the image that we have is of her 6th child. So she's not just a mother, but she's a mother of a pretty healthy family. And then we can finish with the installation view of the wall that you created on this section, which I know you don't call meander. I think you called it something like rhythms and waves or something, but would love to hear about that transition, is between like her training and a really, deeply crafted kind of a formal part of her work.
Sure. Yeah, I think that the idea of the meander as a line exercise, as a meditative practice, as a thought exercise, as a planning exercise, we found to be sort of endlessly useful in thinking about Asawa. And for those who don't know, sort of, the meander, it's a Greek form. So it's, thousands of years old, and it's something we're sort of accustomed to seeing on friezes in architecture. It's something sort of around us in a way. But the idea of actually studying that and what a meander means, this idea of a line that moves forward, loops back onto itself, and then if you leave yourself the right amount of space by planning ahead, you can loop back out and then continue, and it goes on ad infinitum. And that's something that we even thought about, the idea of the meander being almost a metaphor for her drawing practice overall, that she's coming back to some of these same ideas and forms and motifs, always seeing something a little different, and it's always still kind of moving the practice in new directions and forward. But it became such an important, I think, like line study, even thinking about geometry and math. Sometimes in her notebooks, you'll see from planning out meanders, the different approaches to the meander and whether you want to actually study it mathematically or not. So it seems like it was something that also captured her fascination throughout her life, and something that definitely came out of teachings from Albers. We see a lot of the conversation about meander in notebooks from his classes, but then also in with other professors as well. And we brought together not just some of these Black Mount College meanders, as you mentioned, Christina, but this idea of, what if you sort of think about the meander more expansively and think about these waves and patterns, or the meander as a wave or a pattern, how she sort of continued to be interested in that kind of drawing practice throughout her life. So this particular wall is gathering together a number of these waves and patterns. Many of them are made with these kind of notched markers, where she's actually incised the felt tip of a marker so that she can create a sort of ready-made pattern in one stroke of multiple lines. And then at the Whitney, we've hung this display of drawings on wallpaper that is itself inspired by one of Asawa's works. That was a work, in fact, that we learned from Asawa's children, that was intended to be a wallpaper pattern, and it just never was realized as such. So it actually tiles like very well. That's kind of a test. Like, if it's supposed to be wallpaper, does it actually work? And yes, it does. So we were able to produce it for the show with their help. And yeah, we liked the way that it actually, in seeing the work as wallpaper, it was the way that you could actually imagine that idea of infinity, that idea that a line can go on forever. Anyway, so I'll stop there. Sorry.
Yeah, this is something, a concept and a formal invention, and within Asawa's work, that we could spend, hours talking about and looking at. And I really encourage, any of you viewers to either, go see the work or get a chance to look at it up close in some of the great documentation. Edouard, is it okay if we just keep moving a little bit? I think we're lingering over some of our topics. Sure. Do you want to say something about meander quickly?
I just want to say one thing, and like what Kim said about the meander as being a kind of metaphor for a journey as an artist. And this is something we realized quite earlier on. And as you know, when you think of a retrospective, a common way to structure things is to follow chronology, which makes a lot of sense for many projects, because it has a kind of embedded narrative of development, art and life being tied together, and then it unfolds. But in the case of Asawa, we realized that there's a lot of cyclicality, meandering, returning to things. And so we felt that actually using a thematic structure was more appropriate. It really came from the work, and we felt it was more legible in this way.
Thank you. Thank you for reinforcing that. I actually do want to come back around to that as we maybe finish up the conversation, because an interesting thing happened to me as I was, making my rounds for the exhibition. Okay, so here, finally, we get to the promise of seeing some of her sculptural work in this category that I've called forms within forms within forms, which Kim and Edouard know is from a letter that a fellow artist of Asawa's, Ray Johnson, wrote to her in a letter that actually is in the exhibition in this beautiful case, and is an incredible both like concrete poetry, abstract work. I really, really encourage you to take a look at it. And for anyone who is, a fan of Ray Johnson and his School of New York Correspondence, it's a very, very special piece in avant-garde art history. But I thought we could look at this work. I mean, just sort of keeping in mind her sculpture work, which is kind of always hovering, well, in this, thinking about her drawing practice. But Chloe, we could go to the second slide, the next slide. And actually, my alternate title for this section actually was just Screen Tone, because I was shocked when I saw this piece and, again, read about the sort of like, it's how it was made. And then really this piece pushed me to think about, like, what is a drawing and what is its relationship in Asawa's situation to sculpture. for those of you who maybe have seen this work or know the material of screen tone, I mean, it's actually not on paper, it's actually on film. And that Asawa herself was experimenting with these new technologies was so amazing, much less doing it in her own drawing practice. So I mean, Kim and Edouard, either one of you'd like to actually talk about this work. Both, again, we're starting to see this familiar material invention with philosophical kind of and conceptual practice merged together in Asawa's work. So I'd be happy for either one of you to address this like astounding piece.
I'm happy to start. I mean, these were really interesting works. We are so pleased to discover. And as far as we understand, the first time that you use this technique, which really comes from design, designers use this adhesive, which has these pattern black dots in different sizes and densities. And essentially, it's an adhesive. It's transparent. You cut it, you burnish it, you layer it. So we were very struck by these works. They're very hard to reproduce, even on a screen. You have to see them because they're very, very sophisticated and fine. But from our understanding, the first time that she really played with that technique was when, in 1955, she applied for the second time for a Guggenheim Fellowship. And as you know, fellowships are very, very difficult exercise because you, as an artist, you have to not only verbalize your project, but also visualize it. And the first fellowship application that she did a few years earlier, she actually included drawings, but then she realized that this technique was really appropriate to give a sense of the layering and a sense of transparency that these works have. And also they're very interesting because at once she can show what might be pretty much a whole installation with a kind of taxonomy of different kinds of sculptures. And it's also one of a few inroads into the genre of collage, which she had started already at Black Mountain, as we've seen.
Thank you so much, Edouard. Kim, I'd love to maybe hear your thoughts. If I remember correctly, I'm trying to remember the audio tour, which one's that? But I'm struck by how in this application piece or in this work, the concepts behind her sculpture are already there, and also in the drawing and in the practice itself, sort of like this notion of seeing, absence as part of what she's creating with her line, and then also thinking about the viewer looking through a sculpture, so this idea of spectacle as invisibility, and that drawing is in itself sculptural. So just if you would have any thoughts to share on that, be great to hear.
Sure. I mean, and I think a very important piece of the installation of this Forms Within Forms display at the Whitney, but it will be the same at the Menil, was to really bring the looped wire sculpture into the narrative of the drawing practice in a way of seeing it rather than and then there's this aha moment that the drawing leads to, that it's actually so much part of the process, and that the sculpture itself then yields more drawing. It brings her back to 2 dimensions. So that was something else I think we were really interested in with these screen tones in that section. And it's funny because the sculpture, I think, if one were asked to just sort of draw from memory one of these looped wire sculptures, you can imagine even as I'm doing my fingers, you sort of think about these contours, you think about those organic rounded forms. But in fact, there's so much going on inside, and there's so many different ways of looking at them, so many layers that I think in a way, she captures that with these screen tones. And almost, I've noticed people looking at these works and going back to the sculpture and then going back again. they help us see the complexity of the sculpture itself. So I think that's been a very exciting moment.
Thank you so much. I think, Chloe, if we go to the next slide. So this next category also, I think, gives us a sense of how sort of both intentionally and seamlessly Asawa moves between 2 and 3 dimensions in thinking, I mean, and in her practice of, working with paper and drawing. This next section is, simply called Paper Fold. And I did not know about this body of Asawa's work. And, I am just blown away by what I can see must have been the performance of her making these works. If any of you can imagine like a 6-foot sheet of paper that she has to plan ahead, the folds and then the coloring. I mean, I'm going to confess that when I was in this section, every time I moved, the works changed. Like I saw, the colors changed, the object changed. The work, I was the one moving, but it looked like the work was moving. And so, to think of this as like an early form of like visual technology or something. And this is also, again, and it's also a media that's between sculpture and drawing, I feel like, between sculpture and works on paper. So and this is a beautiful image of her holding one of the pieces. And I actually don't know if she's finished with it or not. But Edouard, I mean, you write so beautifully about materiality in the catalog essay. And, I know that both of you did a lot of work with your conservation team colleagues. And so just, would love to hear, how you thought about this section, what you learned, anything you would like to share about this really, really incredible. I mean, I think of this as a performative genre of drawing.
Yeah, I think the first thing one needs to talk about in relation to this work, I think, is a love of paper, which is throughout her life. She loves the material, and while at Black Mountain, she's working with arbors again. Arbors try to make students aware of what materials could do to push materials up to their natural end, but without in a way going against their integrity. And they were in that context, she had to make exercises really with akin to origami, where no glue was allowed, nothing was allowed except a sheet of paper. And what could one do to give paper even more strength than it has naturally by using folding. There's also in these works a kind of fascination with that interstice, that moment between when a work leaves this 2 dimensions and becomes third dimension. And we know that from work that the Whitney paper conservator Clara Sebesta did. She was trying to understand how these works were made, and she realized that the artist would have started on the flat sheets, drawing graphite lines to lay out the structure, and then apply the black ink, and then the works were folded. We actually have images of the artist in the process of folding these things. So it's really taking what is essentially a flat drawing, geometric in structure, and then folding it in ways that becomes an origami. Origami was also something that she had learned earlier on as a child, and as John and Troller, who contributed a beautiful essay in the catalog, explain, really Asawa uses origami at different moments in her life and in different contexts, and she uses it extensively as in her teaching. And one of the pinnacles, if you want, of her use of origami in teaching is when she works on a student performance where students take some of these works, literally put them in motion, and play with the flexibility, the openness of these works in space. And we have actually this footage in the Whitney installation of this 1989, excuse me, performance. And then finally, let's say this idea of creating an experience that really empowers the viewer. You may think of, you know, some examples of op art, you know, artists, they're very aware of where the viewer stands, and as you move along, there's a real visual shift that is really, the effect is really unique to you and based on where you stand. So Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything to these works.
I'll be brief. I was thinking about how I know you're calling this part of their discussion paper folds, Christina. The section of the exhibition where these works hang is called In and Out, and I wanted to mention that because that idea of that dynamism of in and out was such an important part of our thinking about these works, and of how she would use paper folding to then study volume that could be then translated into 2 dimensions in certain kind of volume studies, but also the idea that this is something we really learned from Asawa's daughters, who were who often assisted with the paper folding, or, you know, part of that process, and also from Claire, our conservator, that that to make these folds, it is this multi-part process. It doesn't go from flat directly to these final folds. Rather, it is, you know, the first fold in one direction, and then that moment where you have to trust your materials, trust the paper to open it back up again, fold it in a different way, again, kind of give the paper memory. And so there's something about that kind of in and out movement that I think we wanted to capture.
Thank you so much for that, Kim, Edouard. I agree that, you know, picturing the process of making these works, you know, and as you said, the sort of emotional journey that you have to take to you know, to actually not know what's going to happen, but trusting what's going to happen. And then as you kind of get better at it and trust it, where you just, you know, do it intuitively. So I think that's a good prompt to go to our next to last section. Let's take a look, the notebooks. Okay, so one thing that I want to really, really encourage, you know, potential viewers and others of you who are studying Asawa is to take advantage of how many notebooks are in this exhibition. I mean, I was, you know, either reading or listening to one of your live programs, and then as I understand it, within the, you know, estate of Ruth Asawa, that there are over almost 300 of them. And so to think about this as something that came with her wherever she went every day, this section, even though I'm calling it notebooks, it's actually about her community and about her friendships with artists and her work as an activist within the San Francisco arts, you know, arts region. Edouard, I really appreciated that you mentioned the paper fold also formed her own pedagogy that she brought to her high school that she, you know, founded in San Francisco. And so again, there's so many great works in this notebook section. You know, this is a little show in of itself, and a little encapsulation of Ruth's life. But I decided to maybe focus on the women, and maybe ask the curators to speak about specifically, you know, her, I mean, the works, but also like the people in her life, like Andrea Jepson. The next one will be, I think, Imogen Cunningham, the photographer, and the last one is Suzanne Jackson. That there's a beautiful, beautiful audio tour stop, which talks about Suzanne, you know, seeing the work for the first time, since you remembered Asawa drawing her portrait, like at a whatever community board meeting or something. So would love to hear your thoughts. Maybe Chloe, if we go back to the full view of the wall to start, and, you know, about your thinking about this section, and really Ruth's relational, her circle of relations, but then the way her practice kind of, you know, weaves into it and, you know, makes it alive.
I'm going to start with this one, Edouard, and then I'll turn back to you. Okay. So yeah, this section was This was a very, very difficult section to select, I would say, because there were so many. I mean, as you say, Christina, this could be kind of a show unto itself. There were, even within the notebooks that we're showing, there were so many other pages that we really wanted to show too. That it felt like this was such a generous part of her practice, both these beautiful drawings of the people in her life, whether that is, as you say, family, community, but also the objects that in many cases people gave to her to draw. So there's this incredible reciprocity as well in the way that she sort of worked and received material and then kind of gave back. So I'll let Edouard talk more about some other things here. I'll try to address some of your questions about the women here. So one challenge, I would say, an exciting challenge in the selection was that of the works is that, of course, we're selecting, fabulous drawings. But in a section like this, you can't help but also think about who is being represented. So, for example, with Imogen Cunningham, they were such close friends. They were really a generation apart, but it feels like they had this this incredibly kind of co-supportive this role that they played for one another. And we're often kind of seeing one another. So that's why we have so many beautiful photographs of Asawa were taken by Cunningham. And there are similarly mountains of drawings of Cunningham by Asawa. So there's, people like that that we felt were really important. It was just about selecting like the right one. Andrea Jepson, Bay Area viewers may know, was a friend of Asawa, but also the model for the Girardelli fountain. So she was the model for the mermaid in the fountain. So to have her here was, what's that?
Can we just maybe advance to the Jepson? Yeah.
Oh, you have it. The drawing. Yes.
Right, the drawing. Yeah.
Exactly. So we have that. And wait, now I'm already, how did I just forget? Oh, Suzanne Jackson.
Right. And then maybe we'll go to the next one.
Yeah. So in a way, also Jepson was a way of bringing in all of, so much of Asawa's work in for these public commissions in San Francisco, which was a huge part of her life. And then with the inclusion of these notebooks, one of which had Suzanne Jackson, another one has Noah Purifoy, we were able to also point to the advocacy work that Asawa was doing for decades, and particularly with real concentration in the 1970s. This is the moment when she's an active member of the California Arts Council. So somehow I think that was really surprising for us as we're flipping through notebooks, and I was like, Noah Purifoy, Suzanne Jackson, like I didn't know that she even knew them, but people who may not have crossed paths within their artwork, but yet they were all serving together and knew each other well. And as Jackson says in her audio guide entry for the show, she's like, we were in so many meetings together. We were really close. She was always drawing. So she was in the meeting, she always had her notebook in hand and she was drawing, and I never knew what was in those notebooks. So it was a way that she was actually almost like indexing the people around her, but also you imagine kind of listening while moving her hand, that was just like a constant. I'll pass it over to Edouard.
Yeah, so this section we called Lifelines, and it's really how drawing ties her to our ecosystem. And by ecosystem, we mean these networks of relationships that were very important to her: her family, first and foremost, her friends, members of the arts community, and so on, but also a connection to nature, which was very, very crucial. She was very ecologically minded. She absolutely loved, flowers, plants, a garden. And for us, it felt natural to bring our drawings of plants and natural things and of people together. And in some cases, the drawings actually belong to both categories. And for example, we have included some of our drawings of plants, and she'll say bouquet given by my son, and then there's the date, or by my daughter. And so a bouquet becomes almost a portrait by proxy, or at least a portrait, a discrete, restrained portrait of a relationship. through line. Also, what's really striking as you look at this drawing and then the Andrea Jefferson portrait is the range of papers that she used. So she used, paper that doesn't, absorb as much ink, such as Cunningham and Andrea Jackson, and then this one of Andrea Jefferson on Japanese paper, which is very absorbent. And here you can see how she really enjoys working on the pattern and how the ink really pulls in interesting ways. And clearly, she's really exploring the agency of her materials. And for me, this is the sign of an artist who's really at the top of her skill, meaning that she has command, but she also lets the materials do their thing. And she's very always curious to see where they will lead her.
Thank you so much. Again, this section is so deserving and rewarding in the close looking. I mean, you could spend hours in this one section just looking, as Edouard mentioned, in the decisions that she made and the decisions that she let the paper make. This amazing portrait of Imogen Cunningham, with her just the negatives of her fingers and the few little lines describing the pearl necklace. So we're going to finish with one last work. Chloe, maybe if we could go to this piece. So also, Edouard, I really appreciate that you mentioned, for the sake of our public, some of the categories and works that we didn't cover in today's talk, and really encouraging everyone to go back and get to know Ruth Asawa's work. Yeah, I mean, I in particular, for some reason, I did not include as many of the nature-based works, the flowers and the vegetables and the trees, which are, again, really reinforce Asawa's commitment to not only to the subject of the practice of the drawing practice, but really to the environment. And I think, but we do have this one last work, which I think is such an astounding, curious object, because you set it apart from the rest of the exhibition. And I really, really am interested in your thought process in its placement and its inclusion. And again, it's one of those works that confounded me and opened my mind up as to, what constitutes a drawing by Ruth Asawa. I mean, it's a work that's actually on metal, and so it kind of like takes it out of that paper realm, and then the level of detail and control, of it as a drawing or punctured practice, and then that the title is even like tied wire sculpture drawing with 6 petals. It's sort of like this piece says it all. But then here's like the sort of like, big philosophical moment as I was looking at it, and I thought about it and thinking like, what a great piece to end the show. But then I was thinking, well, actually, they're not saying it's the last piece. It's actually, you could walk through the show any way. And so I actually realized that you were maybe possibly playing with, this idea of very open-ended, practice and an exhibition. And I just thought I would ask you, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on that, but also then obviously with the title of the show, which has multiple meanings to it. And I would just love your thoughts on, how intentional that was, or and you're thinking about it in terms of Ruth's work.
I can start, or sorry, go ahead, Edouard.
You should explain why the piece is located where it is.
Yeah, exactly. So in the Whitney presentation, as you saw, Christina, this work is situated just kind of as you're walking out of the gallery, and in one of our windows. The Whitney building has, along the west side of the galleries of the building, we have this full scale windows that look out onto the Hudson. So we generally have that totally open, and our visitors love, that kind of connection between the building and the world outside. I would say when Edouard and I were first, looking at a number of Asawa's works, just, still kind of wrapping our heads around the project itself and how we might organize it, we saw this work and we both just kind of lit up at the idea, at just the notion of this object that we had not heard of before, that it was a window piece. It was one that originally was in the artist's home, in a window. And the idea of this kind of coming out of this group of drawings at Asawa begins in the early 1960s that relate to tied wire sculptures. This is a group of works we did not talk about today, but there is a section of the exhibition called Growth Patterns that looks at these works that are both that are drawings where she's focused on thinking through, sort of moving from a central point outward, thinking about plant growth. And I won't derail us, but there's also sculpture, that's thus the title here, that also is like kind of thinking about a central point and growing outward. So seeing that we have other drawings of Asawa on paper where she's using a sort of almost like pointillist technique, just using a single dot to create the forms. And here she's doing that on tin and creating these same forms that she was doing on paper in relation to kind of tied wire sculpture. So I also immediately thought, we have that window. And maybe there's a way of like, what if we could actually have this work in the Whitney window there? So what you'll see at the exhibition is that we in fact kind of built a wall around the work so that it would be sort of, it's like ordinarily it's just plain window, but we built a wall around it so that it would be in fact inserted as a window. And I think many people have asked me, interestingly, like, oh, this is part of the permanent display? I didn't know that. Like, they think that it's just part of the museum. But it's been also a nice way of thinking about, I don't know, I like the idea of looking through Asawa's work to the world, and also knowing that it also changes so much over the course of the day. So depending on the light coming in, depending on what, so it has this life to it that I feel like adds a really great either endpoint or beginning or re-entry point to the exhibition. And I'll turn to Edouard to talk about the title also and anything else in the sculpture.
Yes, I mean, for me and for us, really clearly, the fact that here she's drawing with light was very, very special. And it's a kind of inversion of these drawings where she used the markers, where every mark tends to be a black mark, so dark against the light paper, whereas here the mark effectively is the light. It's not just light, it's the light coming through it. Also, like structurally, this work is a great example of a thinking about natural processes, and Albers would admonish the students to study nature and learn its principles. And Asawa did that also with an awareness of the geometry or mathematical principles that are often embedded in nature. So how a pattern starts from a center, and the center is a decision in itself. And it's a kind of, potentially infinite network that extends. And in this case, it could extend potentially in depth, but also to the sides ad infinitum. So very, very, very special work. It's also, it precedes, later project in the late 70s where she actually works on bronze plaques that she's commissioned. So you see her really moving from paper to tin, and then to other to bronze. So thinking through certain motifs across materials and across media.
Thank you both so much. I feel like, it's sort of like at the end of a beautiful poem or sermon or something. It's like, the notion of light coming in and of it changing is such a beautiful place for us to probably put a pause on our conversation and hand it back to our mistress of ceremonies, Chloe, and invite the audience. I mean, it was hard for me not to actually start looking at the chat because I felt like, I want to stay focused on talking to our brilliant curators. But Chloe, we would love to hear from the audience. And Eleanor, Carolyn, any of you, please share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much for this incredibly warm and generative dialogue about the exhibition. It's been really lovely to listen to. We have the opportunity now, everyone, to ask questions. So I encourage you to post your questions in the chat, and we will pass you the virtual mic. But the first question today is going to be from my colleague, Eleanor. And Eleanor, I'll give you the chance to say hi.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you so much, Christina and Edouard and Kim. This has been incredible. The show is just so stunning. I'm curious if you could speak a bit to who were Asawa's inspirations, what other artists influenced her practice. While I was looking at the work today, I was thinking about some connections with artists like Marc de Souvero and also with Gego. And I was wondering if there are any people that you know about that she was inspired by, or maybe who she collaborated with.
I think the curators have to answer that one.
That's with exactly, Kim. It's not an easy question. I mean, one artist that I could mention with confidence is Annie Albers. So Joseph Albers' wife, but also Albers himself. They are works in a kind of abstract geometric vein that can resonate with some of the work that Asawa did. I think in particular some of the stamp works that she did, in the late 40s that really evoke, in my view, some weavings by Annie Albers. I can think of that. I don't know, Kim, if you want to add any other connections.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question too, and it's easy to, I think, go back to, as Edward is thinking about also, these Black Mountain professors who she maintained these very strong friendships and relationships with throughout her life, from Albers, but also Buckminster Fuller. So those are people I think that she was, very inspired by. The example of Gego is so interesting because, of course, those of us New Yorkers, we had the Gego show at the Guggenheim right before, and in fact, I think we overlapped with a week with Asawa, and it's hard not to think about those two artists, such similar ideas about like space and dimension and kind of the relationship between drawing and sculpture. To my knowledge, Asawa did not know Gego, but I could be wrong, maybe knew of the work in some way, but definitely kindred spirits. So I think that, yeah.
Eleanor, I'm going to mention one work maybe as a sort of like side answer to your question. And Edouard and Kim, I'm thinking of the amazing wall of masks that Ruth had in her house. So she had a like a, I don't know if you call it a practice, but she had a when friends would come over, including Buckminster Fuller and her former teachers, as well as members of her family and different artists would come to her house. She would create a kind of a ceramic mask of them, and this piece is now on view at the Cantor Museum at Stanford University, and it's a really incredible just display of her relationships and sort of what the ways in which like her personal life merged with her artistic life, merged with her activist life. And there is a drawing in the Whitney exhibition that is, I think actually Elisa Alexander refers to it as a double portrait of some sorts, because Ruth did it herself as a self-portrait and a mask of herself. So it's just, again, amazing record of the way in which she thought about, I think, her community and her sources for her work. So I don't know if there's a simple way to ask, that the answer the question that you asked, but somehow it made me think of the masks.
And if I could just add one thing to me, and Kim, tell me if you think otherwise, but Asawa really comes across as an artist who really focused on her own practice, who's aware of things, but she doesn't come across as an artist who really quotes the work of others, so much as being focused on her own agency and process.
Thank you so much for that amazing question, Eleanor. And thank you for all of those replies. We have a few more questions from the audience. The first is from Paul Lanier. Paul is wondering, which pieces are some of your favorites in the exhibition for each of you to answer?
You in the blanket, Paul?
Oh, that's a good answer.
Me too, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm gonna share a story about Paul in the blanket, because again, in studying for this panel today, I came across some research that another curator, Ruth Erickson, at the ICA Boston, in an essay that she wrote about Asawa, she mentioned that Asawa's portraits, or so-called portraits, works of paper, like there's an entire genre of people sleeping, which I think is such a fascinating genre, because the essay is very much from a kind of really thoughtful feminist view about what it is to be a mother, much as a mother of six, much less a mother artist of six, and how, sometimes caregivers are told you should sleep when the children are sleeping, because like you're not going to get any time off otherwise. But to think of Asawa as she's documented as being a kind of insomniac, and she has talked about not wanting to sleep because she was so busy doing her other things, artwork amongst them high. So just the notion of like a body of work that's about others sleeping, which is actually a record of Ruth being awake, is just, an amazing, this flip of like how rich her life was. But I would say, and I actually don't know if this work is in your exhibition, Kim and Edouard, but even though I didn't talk about them, some of the drawings of flowers are so amazing. There's a double calla lily piece that is, kind of a vertical piece that is, just so touching that, you kind of walk through shows, or you go through catalog, you think, which piece do you want to take home with you, which is a very personal decision. It's not necessarily a decision of what's the most important piece as an art historian, or what is the most valuable piece or something, but the one that speaks to you. And so there was just something special about the flowers that looked like they could have been dancers, or they could have been different points of view, but they were also, there's something, I don't know if that piece was one that was like a flower from, my son, or from my daughter, or from a friend, but I was kind of thinking the flowers were to me. So
I was going to add one thing to your point about the sleeping children. And one thing that our visitors unfortunately don't get to see in those, especially those early notebooks, we have one of the notebooks, for example, in the Lifeline section, has on 2 pages drawings of Asawa's daughter Addie asleep. And if you flip through the rest of that sketchbook, as is the case for many of the sketchbooks during that period, and their children are very young, you'll have these beautiful drawings of the children asleep. They'll flip the page, kids are awake, because there's little, kid drawings, crayons, and everything that appear in the same notebook. So it is like they really become, you can almost imagine like the course of a day. It's really amazing.
Thank you so much for those answers, and thank you, Paul, for that question. The next question is going to be from Deborah. Deborah, I'll give you the chance to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So first of all, thank you. This has been a really enjoyable way to spend the last hour and a few odd minutes. So a couple of things that really resonated for me were the meander. I was listening to your virtual lecture at the Whitney, Kim, the other day. And I was thinking about your comment as well, Edouard, on the progression from paper to tin to bronze. And I guess what I started to think about a little bit is, this is a woman with 6 kids. She clearly has a contemplative or a meditative process in some of the ways in which she draws, and she has a clear affinity for nature. So I wondered how much, or whether there was any time, I mean, again, you'll have to excuse my ignorance. That's why I come to these things. Did she spend on ceramic? Because I would have thought the appeal of this, both with kids, with its, this very tactile quality, just on a number of different levels and connection points. Was this a media that she explored? Was it something that was of interest?
I'm going to start that. So that's a great question. And I actually really like how you tied almost a potential inclination toward clay or ceramics to the rest of the way that she worked. And she did work in clay and ceramics. So the life masks that Christina was mentioning before were one sort of one project, a long project where she was doing that. But also she would use ceramics and clay often in preparations for and in final commissions, public commissions, often outdoor commissions within the Bay Area. And this is a place where, I think we mentioned that her daughters were sometimes involved with some of the paper folding and some of those activities. And the ceramics and clay were a place where her son, who might be on this Zoom, was also involved and is a ceramicist himself. So there's, that your inclination was absolutely right.
Thank you so much for that question, Deborah. If we have no further questions, that's going to be the conclusion of our Q&A today. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our Poet Laureate of the day, Cleo Abramian, to the virtual stage. Cleo Abramian is a poet originally from Colorado. She's the author of the chapbook Debt, and her writing has appeared in Armenian Creatives, Shit Wonder, Columbia Journal, Dirt Child, and elsewhere. She is currently an MFA candidate at UMass Amherst's poetry program. And with that, over to you, Cleo.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And thank you for this wonderful talk. It's been really incredible. I'm going to read some old poems and some new poems. The first one is called More Renaissance. I was banned from the apartment. I was banned from your pelvic floor. Your pulse is a rock turning. Like all good nature poems are born in a dried up stream bed filled with white women. So close to Route 66. When you took a metal detector out into the snow, I could have been yours. To perform my ritual of tuning in, I wrap myself in tape. I hold the skylight upright. Is there blood on my pants? Have I made myself into a circle again? My dehydrated peach wants a hot benevolence. My boyfriend's sister thinks it's wrong to be with my condition in the real world. A billboard for UFOs, a blood orange veil catching fish in its net. It's been a long time, carrying around this plastic bride. I lay her down in the morning. I put my finger in her mouth and smear the paint. Squatter. Be my talismanic property. Be my new prize for wanting, the narcissism of this hot world, cut loose like a blimp. I came to re-virginize my willpower, a white light that won't burn. It made me its food. In the slow yes of drought, the plump kleptomania of my gaze has spread out over everything. Like the stretched spine of a whirlpool, the frenzy of a sealed clam, I am a woman on the brink of a recital, which means nothing. Like a good performer, I move like gauze, pith. I blink, I spit out desire, its filament biting up the hand. So long before you, I sat on the earth like a crane, eyes cute opened with rope. My mind is everything you want. Overfed baby and its bouquet of teeth, fish scales filleted like new perfume. The tyranny of my going will keep you alive. Out of the river comes a grass which has all of my longing. Your sun breaks open. Its slashes of orange fall across me in the shape of a trout. It's the new year today. The rock vibrates in the bottle in the dark corner of the room. I've been trying to tell you how wretched to be so awake, to drip with the smell of a far-off thing. Yogurt on my sideburn, crystals forming in shimmering pods. Like astral project my hair in loose ribbons of light. The tiny pig stares at the wall. She's a genius. Her freaky ecology messes with my brain. She's such a narcoleptic, so passion-flowered in passion flower night. What is it to unmelancholy a body? I am cellular as cells bloom above my head. This next poem uses some Armenian and Farsi words. It's called Location. Sirum, to love. I lie, say rain, say please come, this grass gags me shining, a wreckage. My soft, boring clam says patina, patina, so glad I'm so prolific. Botsir, to open, want more open spaces. In my head, I call you dark, blue, black, immortal, the lake, the gulch, can't, morning. My small fried meadow falls down the stairs, an exoskeleton in breach. I am less original, glad to be here. Khadahafez, bye, no, vomit, may God be with you. This is the last poem I'll read. Thank you so much for having me. It's called, And in the Baroque Night We Lie Down. My aunt misses her flight. She is too busy arranging her Tupperware of côtelet along the windowsill of Terminal B. And when she hears her name on the loudspeaker, she just hears, hey, you, and goes and turns on her megachurch like a ceiling fan in the dark, like a pike in brackish weeds. And she won't circumnavigate her bad tooth. And when she touches her forehead to the computer, she won't say motherboard. She'll say where Noah finally landed his ship. And with rollers in her hair, say, come sip on this peeled rose water, Jonna. And I have never been back to climb the mountain. And I have never used the word lacuna without hearing Ofra Haza singing Sherhar Toret, my skin was pale. And like a wave, I watch it like a graph, not the moment when it crashes, but when it begins to lose its breath. And in Yerevan, they mail dried honeydew and say, where have you been? And in Isfahan, they say it's still too soon. And in the Powerball mashup, the Christmas spirals chirp and coo. And in the motel, my felt box swallows every baptism. And in Tel Aviv, I am sent into the breakout room with the men with the paranoid beards, and we are touched and we go out with our clean tongues. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Cleo, for concluding today's event with that reading. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And thank you to Kim, to Edouard, and to Christina for today's conversation. Thank you, Megan and the team at the Whitney for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 23 years now, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And if you're free tomorrow, Saturday, October 7th from 6 to 9 p.m., join us at Industry City as we celebrate our 23rd anniversary, the launch of our October issue, and the opening of Singing in Unison Part 8 Between Waves, curated by our friend Alice Nyenpu Ko at Industry City. You can find more details at the link in the chat. And on Monday, as we observe Indigenous Peoples Day, join us for a screening of Mothni, Towards the Ocean, Towards the Shore, a film by Sky Hopinka. Register at the link in the chat to receive a 24-hour access link to the film on Monday. And as is real tradition, it's crescendo time. We'll give you a chance to turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Edouard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Edouard.
So, thanks
Bye.
for
Yeah,
Thank you so
great.
much.
Thank you, Edward and Kim.
Thank
Can't
you
Thank
so
you.
see
Thank
the
you,
show.
Kim.
Everyone go
Thank
see
you
the
so
show.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edouard. Thank
Go
you,
see the show at the
Christina.
Whitney on through January.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.